The land-based version of the Blackburn seaplane received a new name, Kangaroo. These aircraft were built at the Blackburn Olympia Works factory. The British military command made an important decision. Patrol aircraft over the sea were now to be based on land. This choice was driven not only by the reliability of the Rolls-Royce engines and the impressive range of the Kangaroo bombers. The main advantage was that patrol aircraft no longer depended on sea conditions for takeoff. The basic structure remained almost identical to the seaplane version. The frame was covered with fabric, and the wings could fold. All of that was preserved. However, significant changes appeared. All metal joints were now made from forged blanks instead of sheet metal. The upper part of the fuselage covering was removed, which made the aircraft appear slimmer and more elegant. The engines were mounted higher, closer to the center of the space between the wings. The side radiators were replaced with honeycomb radiators placed at the front. The rudder was enlarged and its rear edge was rounded to support the massive upper wings extending 11 feet or 3.4 meters. Rectangular struts were used instead of triangular ones. The landing gear consisted of two separate main struts and a tail support. Each main strut had a simple V-shaped design with a solid axle carrying two wheels. There were no shock absorbers, which made the struts rather stiff. The only way to soften taxiing, takeoff, and landing was through pneumatic tires measuring 35 by 8 inches, or 900 by 200 millimeters. The separate struts of the landing gear made the Kangaroo an ideal torpedo carrier. However, the aircraft was armed differently. It carried either 4 bombs of 230 pounds, or 104 kilograms each, or a single bomb weighing 520 pounds, or 236 kilograms. The bombs were suspended tail down inside a special internal bay between the main beams of the lower wing. 4 smaller bombs were mounted on holders attached to these beams. The bombs were released by the front gunner using a low-altitude bomb sight. For defense, the aircraft was equipped with 2 Lewis machine guns on scarf mounts, one in the nose section of the fuselage and another above the wings. The crew consisted of 3 men, the front gunner, who also served as observer and bombardier, the pilot, seated 8 feet or 2.4 meters behind the front gunner, and the rear gunner, who also acted as radio operator. A radio set and night flight equipment were included in the aircraft's standard configuration. The ailerons of the aircraft had a dual function. During normal flight, they controlled the roll, but during takeoff and landing, they could be deflected downward simultaneously to act as landing flaps. The ailerons were operated using a large wheel mounted on the control column. Curiously, the rear gunner's cockpit was fitted with engine and rudder controls, yet lacked a control column or ignition switches. The reason for this remains unclear. Initially, the designers planned to raise the rear section of the fuselage using a long tail skid on a strut. This was meant to provide enough clearance for the lower gunner's position under the fuselage. However, this gunner station was later abandoned, and all Kangaroo aircraft were produced with a short, welded steel tail support. The aircraft was powered by 2 inline 12-cylinder water-cooled Rolls-Royce Falcon II engines. Each produced 250 horsepower and drove a 4-bladed wooden propeller. With these engines, the aircraft could reach a maximum speed of 98 miles per hour near the ground. The fuel tanks held a total of 259 gallons of fuel, 97.5 gallons in the forward tank and 118 in the main tank, which provided an endurance of 8 hours. Each nacelle contained an oil tank of 8 gallons and a generator, which made engine startup so easy that the aircraft could take off within 20 minutes. Experienced American test pilot Clifford Prodger was working under contract with the Handley Page Company at that time, testing their heavy bomber. He was later hired by Blackburn to conduct trials of the Kangaroo prototype. On January 3, 1918, the aircraft was delivered to the Aeroplane Experimental Station at Martlesham Heath, where official testing was carried out for 3 weeks. There, the Kangaroo was compared with the prototype of the long-range bomber Avro 529, which had been built rather quickly. Joint trials were organized on January 19, 1918. It is difficult to determine what conclusions could be drawn from these comparisons, since the Avro 529, equipped with 2 190-horsepower Rolls-Royce Falcon engines, was smaller and lighter than the Kangaroo. That same day, the Kangaroo's landing gear collapsed when the tests were only partially complete. Because of this, the device that simultaneously lowered both ailerons to function as landing flaps could not be tested. After repairs, all other operational trials were completed by January 26th, and on February 2nd, the representatives of the manufacturing company were informed that the aircraft was ready for return. A team of Blackburn workers began dismantling and packing the aircraft on March 9th, and on April 27th, it was sent by train to Brough. The Martlesham Heath report stated that the machine displayed a pleasant ease of control at cruising speed. But when gliding with the engines off, the nose was noticeably heavy and the control stick required excessive effort. Lateral control was light and responsive. However, operating the twin rudders was difficult since instead of pedals, the pilot had to use foot carriages, and the control cables passed through the rear cockpit where they could easily be stepped on. Insufficient rigidity caused twisting of the fuselage's rear section when the aircraft exited a steep turn. The forward gun position was placed far ahead of the center of gravity, which worsened balance. The shallow fuselage depth prevented the gunners from lowering themselves enough to fire upward, and the rear gunner could not fire aft because of the biplane tail assembly. A delivery of 50 Kangaroo bombers had been planned, but due to the defects revealed at Martlesham Heath and in response to a departmental inquiry, Lieutenant Colonel James Weir, head of the technical department, issued a memorandum on February 4, 1918. It stated, "The 20 aircraft already completed by Blackburn will be similar to the machine described in this report. It is clear that aircraft of this type should not be ordered until structural modifications have been made. Nevertheless, the next 19 aircraft tested by Blackburn's chief test pilot Robert William Kenworthy received reinforced rear fuselages and other improvements. As a result, later machines no longer suffered from twisting or other issues. The idea of using the ailerons as flaps was abandoned, and the planes were fitted with shock-absorbing landing gear. Each front strut was equipped with a rubber shock absorber covered by a wooden fairing. The forward fuselage section was redesigned to greatly improve the front gunner's working conditions. His gun mount was raised by 9 inches, allowing him to fire freely in all directions. The first prototype was modified to this standard and retained its 250 horsepower Rolls-Royce Falcon 2 engines. The same engines were installed on 4 more Kangaroos, while the next 15 aircraft received more powerful 270 horsepower Rolls-Royce Falcon 3 engines. 20 Kangaroo bombers were originally planned for delivery to the Admiralty as naval seaplanes. They were even assigned special military serials for the Naval Air Service. However, by contemporary practice, when the aircraft were transferred to the Royal Flying Corps, they were renumbered. It is worth noting that the Blackburn Company was forced to slow production due to a shortage of cypress wood. As a result, the aircraft entered service with the Royal Air Force, where these land-based machines were used for anti-submarine duties. Although the Kangaroo was originally intended for use as a night bomber, not a single aircraft was ever employed in that role. 10 machines were transferred to the 246th Squadron of the Royal Air Force at Seaton Carew, near the mouth of the River Tees, where during 1918 they carried out reconnaissance flights over the sea. These missions lasted only a short time, from the 1st of May to the 11th of November, the day the armistice was declared. During that period, the Kangaroos flew more than 600 hours over the North Sea, protecting convoys and searching for German submarines. The results were impressive. They detected 12 enemy submarines, attacked 11, completely destroyed 1, and damaged 4 others. 2 of these attacks were carried out by a single aircraft on the 8th and 13th of June 1918, though they were only able to confirm the destruction of an enemy submarine by another crew, Lieutenant Edward Francis Waring and Gunner Lieutenant Henry James Smith. On the 28th of August, 1918, at 15:25 hours, this crew spotted a German submarine lying on the seabed at a depth of 84 feet closer to the shore of Runswick Bay. From the aircraft, they dropped a 520-pound bomb. The British airmen missed their target and managed only to damage the German submarine, which was later finished off with depth charges by the destroyer Us. This bomber did not survive the war and was lost in a serious crash at Seaton Carew. According to Admiralty reports on the anti-submarine campaign of 1918, at the Seaton Carew Air Base, only 7 or 8 aircraft were flight-ready at any given time, even though the squadron officially had 10 machines as of October that same year. Around that time, 1 Kangaroo was stationed at the Air Observers School of the Coastal Anti-Submarine Patrol in Aldeburgh, while 3 more aircraft were kept at the Marine Acceptance Depot in Brough. It is likely that these machines were never used in combat conditions. In January 1919, when the anti-submarine school in Aldeburgh was transformed into the Marine Air Observers School, 2 more aircraft joined one existing Kangaroo. A curious note appeared in a report stating that, despite the fact that all twin-engine machines are equipped with Rolls-Royce engines, the decrease in the number of operational patrol aircraft due to engine failures is greater than for aircraft of other types. This suggests that the use of the Kangaroo was not as intensive as expected, and it sharply contrasted with the experience of factory test pilots who, during 1918 and 1919, flew all aircraft of this type and never encountered power plant problems with the Kangaroo bombers. After the armistice and the end of hostilities, all existing Kangaroos and their spare parts were put up for sale by the Disposals Committee. In early 1919, Robert William Kenworthy and Harry Goodyear traveled to Seaton Carew to select the best aircraft. They were then sent to Bra, where the Blackburn Company purchased several aircraft in bulk. The deal was finalized on the 10th of May, 1919. The transfer to Bra was explained by a sort of auction at Seaton Carew, where Lieutenant Waldemar Rendell was seeking an aircraft to compete for the Australian government prize of £10,000. Eventually, Rendell chose the first prototype and flew it to Bra for structural modifications. 3 other aircraft were purchased by the Graham White Aviation Company and were flown to Hendon on the 11th of May, 1919. The company planned to use the planes for pleasure flights. The aircraft were stripped of their armament and special fittings, and the rear sections of the wings were covered with plywood. The fabric covering on the upper rear fuselage was removed to create 2 large cabins, each seating 7 passengers. An 8th passenger sat in the extreme nose of the fuselage. The aircraft retained their single-tone green camouflage paint and military serial numbers until the 8th of June, 1919, when they received civilian registration. By that time, 1 Kangaroo had already crashed on May 31st in Hendon during a reception attended by the crew of the ill-fated Atlantic Sopwith, pilot Harry George Hawker and navigator Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Mackenzie Grieve, as well as Commander Reed, who had crossed the Atlantic Ocean in a Curtiss flying boat. During takeoff with passengers on board, the left engine failed and the aircraft struck the ground with its wing. No one was injured in the accident, just as no one was hurt in another incident when the first of these 3 aircraft built by Graham White Aviation was damaged in July 1919 so severely that it could no longer be repaired. The 3rd Kangaroo aircraft survived and carried along the full length of its fuselage a large white inscription reading, "Graham White Air Service." For 2 years, while its airworthiness certificate remained valid, the machine took part in weekend parachute drops at Hendon, offered foreign delegations a kind of baptism in the air, and made pleasure flights with hundreds of passengers. By September 28, 1919, when a railway strike caused the aircraft to be used for transporting passengers and mail from London's Hounslow Heath terminal to Roundhay Park, the machine had been completely repainted and given a new civilian registration number. On October 1st, the government requisitioned the aircraft to carry mail to Newcastle via Leeds. Taking off at 7:55 in the morning from Hounslow, the machine carried only 50 letters with a total weight of just over 3 pounds. Naturally, operating under such conditions was unprofitable, and the aircraft was returned to its owning company the very next day. On April 23, 1919, the management of the Blackburn Company founded a subsidiary, North Sea Aerial Navigation, to perform commercial flights. The first registered flight took place on May 10, 1919, when pilot Kenworthy transported a chartered cargo from Gosport to Leeds. The first leg from Gosport to Hounslow took 40 minutes, and the remaining distance to Roundhay Park took 1 hour and 45 minutes. A large glazed cabin with seating for 7 passengers was soon installed on this aircraft. Glazing was also added to the nose section of the fuselage to provide comfort for an 8th passenger. After performing a flight on May 26th with 3 passengers, Kenworthy began a short service on the West Hartlepool-Brough line. 2 other Kangaroo aircraft of the North Sea Company were modified in a similar way, though with different details. One had a glazed nose section and, like the Graham White machines, a large open cockpit at the rear of the fuselage for carrying cargo or taking passengers on sightseeing flights. Bearing Royal Air Force markings, the machine participated in the May 1919 celebrations of victory in the First World War and operated pleasure flights over Roundhay Park. The other Kangaroo had the same type of enclosed cabin, but its nose was rebuilt to form 2 standard pilot cockpits, arranged one behind the other, almost certainly with dual controls. The first civil air transport exhibition took place in Amsterdam in 1919 and attracted the attention of all leading European aircraft manufacturers. At the stand of Blackburn Aeroplane and Motor, large models of commercial Kangaroo aircraft were displayed, with passenger cabins designed for both land-based and seaplane configurations. Interestingly, about 20 years later, in March 1939, a model of an unfinished Kangaroo seaplane was presented to the Hull City Museum. On August 8, 1919, the aircraft Kangaroo, piloted by Kenworthy with 5 passengers on board, took off from Leeds and set a course for Amsterdam. After completing customs procedures at Hounslow Heath, the machine crossed the Channel and landed in Brussels before nightfall. The next morning, the aircraft was inspected by the King and Queen of Belgium, after which, in 1 hour and 35 minutes, it covered the distance from Brussels to Amsterdam. The immense enthusiasm of the Dutch kept the Kangaroo in the Netherlands for 6 whole weeks, during which it performed entertainment flights. During that time, a 5-day forced stop occurred when sand from the airfield surface damaged the aircraft's propellers. In addition, the Kangaroo took second place in the competitions for takeoff, rate of climb, and landing run. The profits from entertainment flights were so significant that the company's management decided to send a second Kangaroo to the Netherlands. On August 28th, Captain Woolley took off for Amsterdam via Hounslow and Lympne. The next day, the exhibition organizers presented Captain Woolley with a gold watch after his Kangaroo took part in the commercial aircraft circuit race and finished last. A week before the exhibition's closure, Major Will joined Kenworthy and Woolley with a third Kangaroo. Altogether, they carried 1,400 paying passengers and completed numerous free flights. During their entire stay in the Netherlands, no incidents occurred with the aircraft. Later, all 3 Kangaroos returned to Brouw. On the way home, Kenworthy spent 3 hours flying from Amsterdam to Lympne and 2 hours on the Hounslow-Brouw leg. During the flight, the fuel consumption was 25 gallons per hour. On September 30th, 1919, when Kangaroo aircraft of the Graham White Company were flying during the railway strike, the North Sea Aerial Navigation Company began regular commercial flights between Leeds and Hounslow. Enclosed cabin aircraft were used on this route. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the plane from Leeds headed south, and at noon, the one from Hounslow departed northward. The fare was 15 guineas one way or £30 for a round trip. Kenworthy flew the first southbound flight with only 1 passenger, the company secretary, who traveled for free. Upon arrival at Hounslow, the aircraft and pilot were requisitioned by the government. Postal workers were on strike, and Kenworthy's new task was to deliver mail to Glasgow the next morning. After some negotiations with the Central Post Office staff, the parties agreed on a payment of £945 for the round trip. With an hourly flight rate of £70, the total duration was to be 13.2 hours. Since the mail load was similar to that carried by the Graham White Kangaroo to Newcastle after reaching Glasgow, Kenworthy, who planned to return to Hounslow, quickly sold 7 available passenger seats for £20 each. Later, the North Sea Company acquired 2 light Avro aircraft. The machines were converted into 3-seaters and used for sightseeing flights and short routes connecting Harrogate, Brouw, and Scarborough. The Kangaroos remained at Brouw and performed flights from the old Leeds airfield in Roundhay Park, whose flying ground turned out to be too small and unsuitable. Eventually, Brouw became the terminal station, air routes were extended to Amsterdam, and the company itself was renamed North Sea Aerial and General Transport. The first flight of the new company was a charter for the Heatons firm from Leeds, performed during a Dutch dockworkers' strike. The Kangaroo crew consisted of pilot Kenworthy and flight engineer Thomas Bancroft. On March 5, 1920, at 12:30 in the afternoon, the Kangaroo departed from Brouw and landed in Lympne at 5 o'clock in the evening. It reached Amsterdam later that same day, at 10:30 in the morning. The cargo delivered to the capital of the Netherlands consisted of more than 1,000 pounds of women's coats and garments produced by the West Riding Cloth Company. After passing Dutch customs, the goods were delivered to their destination, and Kenworthy set off back in a truck. But as the strikers began showing hostility toward him, Kenworthy drove to the Soesterberg airfield and asked the military for protection. With the help of the Dutch soldiers, Kenworthy was able to begin his return journey on March 13th. The aircraft carried 1,200 pounds of German aniline dyes intended for the Bradford Dyers Association. It is worth noting that the cost of transporting passengers and cargo by air one way amounted to approximately £150 sterling. Flights were performed weekly, and at the initial stage, about 21 tons of cargo were transported each month. Unfortunately, the long detour to the customs airfields placed the company at a severe disadvantage, and eventually flights to the Netherlands became unprofitable. Thus, after covering approximately 20,000 miles, transporting 1,200 passengers and 18,000 pounds of goods, this bold first attempt at regular air freight transportation was discontinued. By July of 1921, the company had kept 2 Kangaroo aircraft for training purposes. Around the same time, a Kangaroo equipped with 2 tandem pilot cockpits was sold to the aviation service of the Peruvian Army. Together with 12 Avro 504K aircraft, the Kangaroo was based at Las Palmas Airfield, located about 9 miles from Lima, and remained there until 1923.